Hi guys, this is Pilleater, and here I am talking to Patrick. Hi Patrick.
Hello, everyone. How's it going, Pilleater?
Awesome. Um, it's interesting. You found out about me through the Stark Truth Radio, and I've recently been doing a co-host with Robert Stark. And are you a fan of the Stark Truth Radio?
Yeah, I like some of his stuff. I don't like really agree with. This goes without saying. I don't really agree with everything on there, but I definitely find a lot of interesting, quite a bit of interesting stuff on that
Well,
show.
well, it's definitely a very strange and avant-garde and kind of out there show. I mean, Robert's been doing that since 2010. He's had on people like David Duke to Jim Goad on. So it goes without saying. Yes, it is pretty radical and doesn't matter who's on. But I recently, got in contact with him and just I recently got on NS of KMFDM and Brad Sinclair, who is a wonderful producer. But it's fun once you start podcasting on those issues. I mean, how often are you in politics, or do you consider are you more of an apolitical person?
I'm pretty much apolitical. I don't really fit into any sort of category. I'm not majorly into like the whole racial question that gets bandied about a lot on the internet. For the stark truth, I like a lot of the stuff that he does where he talks with people who are interested in a little bit more obscure types of issues. Um, I'm not really into like the whole David Duke or Jim Goad type stuff, but I definitely understand there are people who are interested in those sorts of things, and I think people have a right to be into whatever they're into, and it's
Rob,
good that we have a lot of different voices out there saying different things.
Robert once said he was a radical centrist. Do you like that term, radical centrist?
I don't, and the reason I don't like that term is because it seems like whenever there's huge social upheavals, that centrists tend to just get totally marginalized, and the more extreme types of people take over. But maybe the fact that he refers to himself as a radical centrist, maybe that's a way to bypass that whole dynamic. So actually, on the other hand, maybe it is a good term to use. Um, so
If you consider your well, that's interesting. If you consider yourself apolitical, it's easy to fall under political ideologies. Say if you're, atheist, then obviously there's going to be a whole atheist religion or an atheist collective where everyone agrees that, they want to be non-religious. But it's also, if you're apolitical, there's also a term that's kind of up and coming, like the term alt-left, like www.altleft.com. Are you aware of such bloggers like Prince of Queens or Blair White, where they talk about these anti-social justice warrior causes?
I'm familiar with Blair White. It's a conservative transvestite. Do people still use the term transvestite, or is that just not like a term
Uh,
that people use
you
anymore?
can say trans person, um,
Yeah.
depending how you use it. But the Prince of Queens is also an openly gay guy who just doesn't like fourth wave feminism. But this term alt left seems to be that they are people who like the political sound politics of the left, but they do not like the radicalism of it, and so they want to see a radical reform where it's not about the anti-fascist action, which you have seen recently with the whole Milo event at California, and shutting down Gavin McInnes when he had his event too.
Well, all these the whole political scene in America, it's stuck on the surface. It's just stuck on like surface issues like skin color, race, gender, sexual orientation. I mean, these are all like these are issues that like lack attentiveness to detail. They lack nuance. Um, the level of discourse is very simple. It's very simplified, and I don't know if the alt left tries to bypass that and actually have substantial conversations about things. I just don't know much about the alt left. But I will say, um, if you look at the way languages have devolved, like you start off with like Latin, which has a very complex grammar system and is very inflected, lots of inflections and so on. And then you see how it devolves into like the French language, Italian language, which are rooted in sort of vulgar forms of Latin, like language of the, I guess you could say, common people. Uh, I think that the political discourse has devolved in a similar manner from a more complex form to a more simplified type of thing. And I feel like if I just get caught up in these sorts of contemporary issues, that it's really a waste of my mind. Because if I just, I can, like, if I spend each day following what's the latest thing on the news, it's just getting in an argument with people based on simple slogans. And there's no actual mental cultivation there. Um, it's just trash, you know. Maybe the alt left isn't that. I'm not commenting on the alt left. I'm commenting on why I don't
Hmm.
involve myself much in the mainstream discourse, political discourse. It's just
Because it's either two sides. It's either you're right or you're wrong, or you can't be neutral on the discussion, and either you have to stick with your beliefs and fight for it. And it seems like on both sides, there's no innocence or no conscious matter for that. I mean,
well, both sides. They're not rooted in anything either. They're not rooted in any sort of like awareness of the past or connection to to connection to an area. Um, they're not. There's nothing sentimental about them either. There's nothing. It's just brutal, simplistic. Um, there's nothing sentimental to it. It's very impersonal. Um, these people like they get involved in these humanitarian causes. They have like this whether it's a love for human, like on the left you have people who owe their allegiance to the international community or humanity as a whole, and then on the right, on the far right, you have people owe their allegiance to a particular like racial group or whatever.
hmm
And what you find is that if you're whoever you're talking to, whether they whatever side, when they owe their allegiance to an abstraction, whether that abstraction be some sort of ideology or some sort of racial group or some sort of um, international community or humanity as a whole, which these are all abstractions, these are all concepts in people's heads. They're not something tangible that you can reach out and touch in your local surroundings. So when people have that primary loyalty to an abstraction, what it demonstrates is that there's some sort of emotional block that they are experiencing that is preventing them from confronting their emotional feelings about things that are in their immediate surroundings. And so, these people, like these like so-called tolerant liberals, they speak as though they have so much love for like humanity and everything like that. But if all you have to do is just look at the way they're behaving to see that they don't really behave as though they have any sort of love in their heart. In fact, they're very like nasty in the way they speak about Trump supporters, and so on. Uh, and so these aren't like when somebody like loves an abstraction, what they're doing is they're just stifling any sort of real love, and they're not actually loyal to anything of substance. They're not loving to the people in their vicinity, or you know, because it's like you only have so much attention, you only have so much emotional energy, and when you invest all that emotional energy into some sort of abstraction, the emotional energy just gets dissipated into a nothingness, and you're left with, well, you actually don't love anything because it was an abstraction in the first place. You got to love something concrete, you know. And it's the same. It's a similar sort of thing with these people in the white nationalist crowd who say that they're loyal to their race. Well, if you actually look at the way white nationalists behave, they spend most of their time viciously, um, like vicious in these vicious arguments with each other, berating one another, and it's like they love the idea of white people, but then when they're actually in proximity with other white people, they actually seem to hate them as much as as much as they profess to love them. And so, I mean, I have no problem if a white person wishes to be loyal to their race and work to preserve the genetics of their race or whatever. I mean, I think that's, you know, a person has a right to do that sort of thing if that's what they want to do. So I'm not trying to say that they can't do that or that liberals can't do that. What I'm saying is that when people get involved in these political things, I mean, they really got to ask themselves, like, are they actually loyal to anything concrete, or are they just loyal to an abstraction? And I think that that's what's happening with the political discourse in the United States. Is you got Republicans and Democrats, and they're loyal to these again, these abstractions, and it's all rooted in the fact that they're avoiding things that are going on in their own heads or in their own hearts. So they're latching on to the news, uh, they're latching on to these ideas, whether it's on the far right or the far left or the moderate right or the moderate left, and they're getting petty squabbles with all of this stuff, about all this stuff with people. But meanwhile, they're neglecting their own emotions, they're neglecting their own ideas on things, and to a certain extent, I think they're neglecting their own personal histories. Like it's like, you know, and they're not really confronting their feelings about things from their past or anything. Uh, and like, because one of the things I like to say is that people oftentimes like to carry the weight of the world on their shoulders in order to distract themselves from their own heads, you know? And so that's what I think it is. I think when these people get involved in these global humanitarian causes or whatever, they're running away from something, you know? And that's what a lot of it boils down to. People, through placing significance and importance on international things, they're taking away importance from their local surroundings, from the actual territory that they occupy. And this is a trend in America that is endemic. And what it ultimately does is it ultimately robs somebody of the ability to be sentimental about things. You know, so there's no real sentimentality about it. because in order to be sentimental about something, you need to have like a a somewhat established relationship with it, have observed it for a while, and gained a sense for like what it's and things like that,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
people just running around.
There's this reminds me of a book I used to like. It was published by Crime Think, and it was Fighting for Our Lives. It was an anarchist premiere. The ideology was obviously anarchy, and another book, Invasion. And what Crime Think believes in is that something very similar to what you're saying, where it's about emotions prevail and not these rhetoric or ideologies, and that I don't know. Is it more that are you very like kind of skeptical of political correctness, and you're more of a proponent about people's feelings, or am I getting this wrong?
Um, well, first of all, I think that a certain level of politeness in society does make sense. Um, However, I don't think that political correctness. I think that political correctness in the way that it is practiced in America goes beyond the encouraging of politeness. Um, and so I won't say that I'm anti-political correctness, because a lot of the people who say they're anti-political correctness, sometimes they like to say like rude things just for the sake of being rude so that they can say they're not politically correct. And so I'm not going to say I'm anti-political correctness, but I certainly don't support it. Um, when I say that, like as far as like value people's feelings, well, what I'm saying is that um, okay, um, like feelings and well, when I say like that loyalty to abstractions robs people of sentimentality about things, what I'm talking about is that these this loyalty to abstractions is a product of an uprooted culture uh, in the United States. I mean, I think that it's good to be able to get up and go and move from one place to another. I mean, oftentimes there are good reasons for people to leave and go and move. And it's important for people to be able to do that. But what I'm seeing, and for some people, their life situation is such that it probably makes sense for them to be either nomadic or semi-nomadic. And so I'm not against the whole traveler lifestyle. But the thing about the United States is that it seems like it's the norm for the general population just to be moving around all the time. And that's not something that's like normal for like a settled civilization to um, to have as their customary way of doing things. And so what this indicates is that people aren't like, because they say like a rolling stone gathers no moss, you know, and so people aren't staying in a particular community, and they're not collecting like the lore of that community, and they're not really establishing like proper like local cultures with local lore and local legends and um, different families that have been embedded in the area for generations who have stories about them that create a certain atmosphere around the community. And so we really don't like, and so when you have like a sort of like village atmosphere to the place you're living in, then you develop some sort of like sentimentality about the various things that exist in that particular community. and so you might be like loyal to particular things in that community. Um, and so, like what I'm saying is that the the uprootedness of so I forget the exact nature of your question, but you said something about feelings.
Yeah,
And
it seems to me that it's not exactly about feelings, but it seems people are definitely motivated by emotion. And some say that the good life is about living out to the potential, not an anti-rhetoric life, but getting your not animal needs, but desires as a human being to get things across, right? Why should this or that be in your way when you know what the good things are in life? Like your family, your friends, your freedom, things like that.
well, I definitely do think that well, I think the good life is related a lot to personal happiness. Um, but yeah, I'm very much more uh, invested in the things around me. Because another thing about the United States is that our understanding of like of what tribe is totally off. Um, like okay, if you look at ancient the ancient Greek language. Uh, okay, well, if by tribe you mean like ethnicity, okay, by tribe you mean ethnic, your ethnic group. So the word ethnic, it comes from the Greek word ethnos, okay, and ethnos, a person's ethnos, their ethnic group, it was defined by Herodotus. Again, okay, it was defined at different points in Greek history. The word ethnos had different meanings, and the earliest meaning we have for it is the way it was used in the Iliad by Homer. It was either the Iliad or the Odyssey, or perhaps both, but it was probably both. But the earliest way of using it we have is the way Homer used it. And then after Homer, the Greek historian Herodotus used it in a different way. And I agree with the way that Homer used it. I don't agree with the way that Herodotus used it. And so Herodotus defined ethnicity as people bound by common blood, common language, and common customs, or common religion. Is it common religion or common, whatever it was? I don't entirely agree with that. Um, but the way that Homer used the term ethnos in terms of like an ethnic group, um, he used it just to mean a group of people who happen to be living together. And that's pretty much the way I defined ethnos, your ethnic group. So I define a person's ethnic group as just basically whatever community of people they happen to be living among. And so just like a group of people and their friends. And so while much of the world is sort of basing their personal identification on bigger things, like bigger abstractions, like uh, I'm actually narrowing, I'm becoming, while everybody's conception of who they are and what their allegiance is becoming bigger and thus more impersonal, my conception of who I am is becoming smaller and more personal, less impersonal, more personal, and smaller. And so I define my ethnic group as just, my friends. That's what I define my ethnic group is. That's just me and my friends. You know, um, I don't, I, because like by American standards, I would be said to be like a white ethnic group, but I don't. Let's see. I think that it's like a white. That's like a skin color, and there's a common European heritage there, but um, and I think that people who do want to preserve, the white gene pool and some sort of, I think that's fine if they want to do that. But um, what I'm saying is I define my ethnicity as just me and my friends, because if you think about like a group of people who socialize with one another and just live with one another and so on, that becomes a that becomes a gene pool, and oftentimes those that sort of becomes a gene pool. It becomes becomes like a tribe, that then passes. Then if it establishes itself, it then passes down some sort of like genetic thing to future generations, um, and I think that ultimately the society we live in is tribal. It's based on small groups of people socializing with one another, and I think that people get distracted from that truth about the world because they get indoctrinated in the schools with all this like stuff about race, and it doesn't make any sense, to be quite honest. It just doesn't make sense. It's just it's just a incompetent way of teaching people, and it doesn't really achieve anything except create a lot of tension and neuroses among the population, and it wastes people's time in conversations that are just a useless waste of time. Like, I mean, because we only have so much time during the day to talk about things and investigate about things and think about things, and we're just being kept on a particular subject, and if we don't get away from it, we're just going to waste our time, our precious time, investigating something that doesn't matter, because the mind, you have to treat the mind like a garden surrounded by walls, and you got to keep out like a bunch of like just bullshit, to use a crude term. You just got to keep out a bunch of bullshit, and you got to like weed out a lot of things too. I mean, I don't know. I mean, when I have gardens, I just tend to, I don't really tend to like distinguish between weeds and non-weeds, but I'm just using because sometimes I like weeds, but I'm just using the analogy about having like weed stuff out. And the
It
thing
sounds
is,
it sounds a lot like this is a kind of an East Asian philosophy, especially with emptying your mind and trying to live a life not based upon artificial constructs of the world, like you've said. If we understand race through a biased point, that if we say those people are going to be more violent, these people are much more uppity. If we were to disregard those things and live this kind of calm meditative life, people would be more unharmonious. So, would you be more influenced suddenly by East Asian culture, or is
I
there?
am influenced by East Asian culture, but I'm not saying that people should disregard entirely certain stereotypes about population groups, because I mean, as a white guy, I probably shouldn't be in the ghetto at midnight. Uh, I probably shouldn't be in the ghetto at midnight, because you never know what's going to happen. Or perhaps there are some neighborhoods which I just shouldn't be in, period. And so, maybe I shouldn't be in the ghetto at all. But the thing is that I'm not saying just disregard stereotypes. I'm saying, uh, I don't know what I'm. Well, so if you want to get into I'd like to get into the East Asian thing, but before I do that, I just want to say that the mind, it's limited by, you only have so much during the day to focus on things, and so you almost have to be like a soldier, uh, and guard your mind and keep certain things out of it, because people who get caught up in the news, they talk about the news every day, but their minds aren't going anywhere because they're just talking about the news, and the news doesn't go anywhere. It just talks about these issues that don't matter, and that's basically it's a distraction. And so people just gotta have some discipline in terms of what they focus on, uh, and what they avoid focusing on. But as far as the East Asian thing goes, yeah, I do like some East Asian culture. Um, I think that I think there are some very toxic ideas about. Um, I think there are some toxic ideas about East Asian East Asians within Western culture, and particularly within these internet communities that sometimes discuss things amongst themselves. For example, you have like the whole alpha male, beta male,
Yeah, game.
like dichotomy, and so people try to like claim that Asian males are beta or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's just okay. First of all, that's just not true. Um, second of all, um, second of all, the thing is that in East Asia, there are certain cultural norms that um, I don't know if I want to get. Oh, yeah, okay. Like in East Asia, there are certain cultural norms that are good to practice if everyone is on board, and so there are certain standards of, I guess, politeness, perhaps. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but there are certain standards of conscientiousness that uh, that when everybody is on board, it is advantageous for the individual to abide by such ethical norms. However, when those ethical norms are practiced outside of that region, they can become it can be a disadvantage to practice those norms because you're not in the environment where everybody else is practicing them, and so in a place where people are a little bit more rude and so on, sometimes certain standards have to go out the window because they could actually be a disadvantage to practice, and so I do think that that situation has to be taken into account. When studying East Asian culture, you have to, as an American, I think it's important for an American to realize that, well, not all of the advice given can be implemented in America, like as an American, because some of these things advised are only appropriate within the nation that it was devised in, and so no, like this whole thing. The other thing I don't like the idea. I dislike the notion that the East Asian men are quote unquote better, and I don't like the notion that the East Asian women are quote unquote more submissive. I think that both I think that both characterizations are the product of lazy thinking. Lazy thinking. I think that the characterization of East Asian culture by these online communities that I'm talking about, that going with the whole alphabet or whatever. I think that the characterization of East Asian culture is just based on a glance at East Asian culture, and it's based on lazy thinking. It's not based on any sort of in-depth observation of East Asian culture, and it's not based on any sort of real self-awareness about one's own culture. Now, what I'd really like to get into is that this overly simplified way of thinking about things that is endemic in the United States, it's not only creating a really stupid idea of what East Asia is like, and this whole stupid idea, this whole stupid way of seeing things regarding East Asia, I do think um, I don't think it's healthy for these ideas to have so much traction, have the sort of traction that they do have, because I think that some young Asian American kids, like in middle school or high school or whatever, are gonna see that, and they're not gonna have the proper psychological defenses necessary to be able to dismiss those sorts of accusations. So I do. I mean, it's not something I'm actually like worried about, but it's something that I'm slightly concerned about. That the negative psychological impacts of that on young kids. But what I would like to say to illustrate some of the just like the idiotic nature of of the of the worldview that a lot of Americans subscribe to, and I mean, I don't want to say idiotic, but maybe just like overly simplified or whatever, is that they're exporting. American academics are trying to export their racial understanding to Latin America, and so you have like these American academics, United States American academics, going down to Latin America, trying to impose their North American understanding of race on people in Latin America. And so North American understanding of race, it's based on it's based on the German understanding of race, which is, the whole thing of like racial purity, uh, which is called biological reductionism, which is like you're white if you're 100% white. And, there's nothing wrong with people who want to think that or whatever, but it's important to understand that different cultures have different ways of defining things. And so if you go in Latin America, it's based on more of like a spiritual or cultural understanding. They have more of a spiritual cultural understanding of race. And so, for instance, say if somebody is like part black, part white, or something like that, but they culturally are very white, and maybe they have like a little bit of money too. That person would be said to have a white soul. So they might be like, oh well, he's a brown person, but he's got a white soul, and so that's what they might say in like a place like Brazil or something like that, or at least that's something they've historically said in Brazil. I don't know if they're changing their tune or what. I just have no idea what their contemporary situation is. And so in Latin America, they have this more like kind of like spiritual understanding, and also they have different levels. And so if you're black, you're black, you're white, you're white. But if you're like a mix, you'll just call you brown, right? So like like a biracial person, like a mulatto in Latin America, they wouldn't just be called black. They would have their own special category. But then you have these United States American academics going down there trying to impose the USA model on them and trying to lump anybody with black blood as being black. And so you had efforts by academics from the United States to try to implement American style affirmative action in Brazil, where anybody who's part black can just say they're black now and then apply for affirmative action. And that is sort of disruptive to the social order that's been established in Brazil over over the centuries to have some sort of where they had different people with different mixtures and different different not only like in terms of racial stuff but also in terms of class situation because it's not all about race, it's also social class. I mean, plus you also have like a lot of you might have a few black people who are rich and in the upper classes there too, so it's a very complex situation with a lot of nuances to it, and and these and these ethnic, racial, socioeconomical, cultural, social class issues, they're so complex. There's so many nuances to them, and they develop in such complex ways that to speak openly about them and try to address them and to almost try to manipulate them and to be in and try to and to attempt to manipulate the social situation into one thing or another, it's very disruptive. I mean, these sorts of things, there are certain things that people just need to close their mouth about because to intervene in it just creates a mess. And that's why ultimately I think that sometimes less is more, and sometimes not talking about race is the best way to go about it. Things just sort of have a way of society has a way of self-regulating. People have a way of just resolving things just through different things. And I think that what the United States is doing by constantly talking about race and constantly publishing propaganda about black issues and other things, what it's doing is it's just perpetuating it's perpetuating a social problem that doesn't need to be a social problem, first of all. But I'm not surprised that this is happening because I think from the outset, America has just had a bad approach to racial issues from the outset. I think that judging from Latin America, Native Americans did not need to be excluded from the economy because in Latin America, they managed to integrate the Native American population into their economy. And so the fact that they were able to do that demonstrates to me that in North America, there was no justification for excluding the Native American population from the North American economy. And so because there was no justification for that, I do think that there was a problem with racism in America's history, I'll say, in particular due to the treatment of the Native Americans. I don't, and I think that I think we're experiencing the same problem, but it's just sort of flipped. and we're now just experiencing the other side of it. And it's 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 just
Have
and
you
it's
ever no, this might sound interesting. I mean, especially that the whole racial conflict, especially in the Brazil, is one of the most complicated issues to determine. Especially that there's you mentioned of the classes. There's a whole Japanese Brazilian class that's pretty
mhm.
much away from everyone else. But in America, yeah, race is one of the most best. They apply a certain rule, but at the same time it's really a controversy that's happening. I mean, have what is your experience with interracial dating, or do you have a certain what is your sexual orientation?
Sexual orientation. Well, I am a heterosexual, first of all. But in terms of in terms of dating, I don't want to get into specifics about the races. I went on one date with. I've dated almost exclusively within um, within my own race. I almost exclusively within my. There's maybe like one or two that were not. I'm trying, but for the most part, yeah. I mean, it wasn't like I was. I didn't really put a lot of thought into like the racial situation. The thing is, though, is that as far as my thoughts on that, I I don't think that there's anything wrong with interracial dating, and I don't think there's any. I don't think as far as like the issue of like biracial children, I don't think there's nothing wrong with that. But the issue is that the United States makes such an issue of of race that if you have a biracial kid, they're going to have a automatic. They're going to grow up in a country that is having a conversation about something, and that conversation could create a sense of unease. But the sense of unease would not be related to the biracial identity itself. It would be related to other people's perception of it, you know? And so I have to take that into account. Because the thing is that if I lived in Latin America, I probably wouldn't put so much thought into it because there isn't this whole like white people of color dichotomy there, you know? But because that there's this whole white people of color dichotomy in the United States, I'm sort of in a position where I'm almost forced to have to take that into account. But I don't think that, because here's the thing, like, I think both of us, when we were talking before, we talked about this one individual who was a Hapa, that means half Asian, part Australian, but that's come to mean half white, half Asian,
Yeah.
um, who was very distraught about his identity. And my point is that I don't think that he was distraught due to anything genetic about his identity. I thought that he was distraught due entirely due entirely to the sort of conversation about race
Mm.
that one finds on the internet.
So your
And
Asian writer is more he's a, he's basically using he observed the internet and the conversation of the internet and thinks it's more about reality, and now he's
yeah,
that's interesting.
yeah, it's entirely like artificial. All these things about um, well, okay, I think that if you look at somebody who's part white, part black, there could be real identity issues there rooted in something genetic, because the person would have to confront the fact that that part of his ancestors were enslaved by a racial group that another part of his ancestors were, or a group associated with another part of his ancestors, and so that could cause some serious conflict there, I think. But that might not even be genetic too, because if you look in Africa, they've been enslaving each other, and the whites really didn't enslave the blacks. The whites were just buying the blacks from African chiefs. So I mean, but still, that seems a little bit more deep. But white Asian, I mean, they've been pretty much on equal footing for like thousands of years, like just sort of going back and forth, like between one culture advancing and then another culture advancing, sort of like runners. One person gets ahead, and then the other person gets ahead for a little bit, and they sort of just go back and forth. Because like you look at China was technologically advanced well beyond Europe for hundreds of years, if not longer than that. And then it was only recent that Europe jumped ahead. And now I think we're starting to see East Asia creep up again and possibly jump ahead. And so these are two groups that have been going back and forth. And so I don't think there's not that it's like a biracial between black and white has a set of issues that just don't exist with a biracial between white and Asian. I just think that any issues with white and Asian identity would be artificially imposed by like people just like looking at conversations on the internet. I can't conceive of a white Asian identity being any issue at all.
Are you skeptical of the whole identity politics, and do you think we should strive towards like more of the universal thinking, which you have been talking about?
I think we should reject both universal thinking and identity politics. I think that we should just become more provincial, more local. I think we should just ignore everything happening beyond like our own neighborhoods or our own towns or cities where we live. And we should just sort of focus on, we should think smaller rather than bigger, because we gotta think, because the president says think big, dream big. Mm-hmm. Well, what's important to realize is that when you pay attention to the details, what's small actually becomes big because you're focused on all the details. And so really what we should be what we should be doing is, because when you're interacting with somebody, you're sort of creating like a mini universe. You're creating like the interaction between two people. It creates a world where only you and that other person exist. That only you and that other creates a world that only you and that other person know about, right? And so when we get involved in these, whether it's universalist or identity politics, we're entering into a world that's being created for us by strangers, whether that be created by like the teachers at the schools, whether that be created by people who run these internet forums or these internet movements. Because this identity politics, it's it's a reaction against a totalitarian enforced universalism. And so the reaction to that is the identity politics, like the black consciousness and so on, the white consciousness, everything else. It's all a reaction to the enforced universalism. And so these are just flip sides of the same coin. But what I'm saying is that particular coin is a coin that we shouldn't have anything to do with in the first place. We should just be sort of creating our own understanding of things, our own understanding of like the world, because like we all have like our own way of doing things, and we all have like something that we all have a way of being in the world and inter with the world is appropriate for who we are.
This sounds a
And
lot like it's very interesting because are you interested in the whole DIY or punk culture? I mean, certainly the
a
Antifa
little
type.
bit,
What?
yeah, yeah. I do like the whole do it yourself punk culture. What I don't like about the whole punk culture is that they have this sort of elitism where they want to like alienate themselves from society in order to prove how elite they
Yes.
are. It's sort of like a race to the bottom.
Because it seems like if we create our own mini universes, what we're doing is that punk DIY tradition of there's a neighborhood, but no one really. Once again, if people cause conflict, there's going to be wars, and then all of a sudden, these whole, like Richard Spencer said, this whole ethno state identity thing is going to happen, as if everyone is going to their rooms at the current moment.
Yeah, well, you do have to have a certain awareness of the wider world in order to be able to preserve your own mini world within the world. Um, but okay, so you're talking about this Richard Spencer guy. He's the alt-right guy.
Yes.
Um, with everybody, like the thing is that I think that um, if there is any sort of ethno state, if there's any sort of ethno state in the United States, it's going to be people. Um, it's not going to be the entire United States. It's just going to be people moving to certain areas within the United States and having small ethnic communities there. And so you might have it's quite possible for white ethnic communities to exist in some areas, black ethnic communities to exist in every other areas. But I think that even if that situation does develop, I would say the vast majority of the United States would still be in a position where it's sort of like ethnically undefined, where it's just people sort of mingling without any sort of oversight.
It's like
As
Obama says, like, there's Kurds in Tennessee, or there's, a Chinatown over there, or something like that. But it also seems, too, that it seems like as well that you see the anti-fascist action, which comes a lot from the whole punk culture, is having riots against these places. Like I said, Milo and Gavin, not because they Milo and Gavin have the feelings of fascism, or that there's some lurking evil behind. And what the Antifa are really doing is, I would say, radical leave me aloneism, as if they want their little space, but they don't want their liberties and freedoms being, treaded on. So what they're doing, these Black Dawn people, are just fighting back to say that they want their own little space or something. Or
so you're saying you think that Antifa is trying to nip any sort of incipient quote unquote fascist movements in the bud before they can
like it's like a disease or
get
a
big enough.
sickness, and they're only doing it that they're having these riots is simply because they're afraid that it might impede on their own freedoms, or that they possibly feel too that if Donald Trump gets in power and he bans all Muslims, then that means their freedoms are coming next. And that means, it's almost as if the Antifa are the defense force of people who are, like you've been saying, are wanting these own little DIY spaces. And I think there's this cross relation and comparison between the Antifa and DIY punk culture.
Well, the thing is that I think you may be right about what's motivating them. I think you may be right about that. But actions are ultimately judged by their consequences and not necessarily the intent behind them. And so I definitely see what you're saying when you say that perhaps they're motivated to prevent a situation developing where there's some sort of ethnic oversight or there's some sort of ethnic order enforced, and they just want to prevent that. However, their actions may be so extreme that they could actually be pushing more people to the far right than
Yeah.
so it could backfire. So I'm not entirely sure if that is the effect of what they're doing, but I'm saying just a quick glance at the situation makes me think that it is possible that they could be pushing some people into the far right. And I think that what we have to realize is that
Well, the thing is, too, that what I'm doing personally is just only a reflection of what I've seen in my daily culture, this whole Asian Aryan thing. It really
okay,
is a flirtation, basically, of saying that, well, I've had many Asian girlfriends, and my other white friends had many other Asian girlfriends, and there's also Asian males and white girlfriends, and we all hang out in, like, this urbanite hip city in Chinatown. It isn't necessarily the whole white DIY punk culture, but it's certainly this very strange, very formative, flirting with the whole avant-garde thing, maybe with street culture, but not necessarily. You might have fans who like the band Juju or something like that, and it's kind of this Asian Americanism or this very youthful cross white Asian thing, and it's just something I experience. And to use your wisdom, it is kind of a little scene, right? Everyone has a little definition of what they would consider their own little Asian Aryan space. However, I'm really just doing is I'm reaching out to other people on the internet the same way your Asian writer has done to make his own cargo cult for his own Reddit. I've done pretty much the same thing on my Twitter and other spaces just to talk to very other similar people. And then after that, when you have this little growing place, a consciousness grows in their mind and they become aware of these things, as if that's how I would put it in such a place. And in no way am I feeling I am unapologetic about these actions I'm doing, is simply because I find this to be close to the truth.
awareness of what things are you talking about? Like,
No,
so
I'm
you
just
say you've
saying.
established your own community, and then in the course of your interactions, you said, oh, an awareness of certain things comes to mind. What sort of awareness?
Well, like I was telling you, I mean, if I see this as the truth, then I've seen, like I said, other friends who are in the same upper class, culture as me. We're all like either Hapa or white on Asian or Asian on white, and we all flirt with this identity that's not necessarily that. It's very small and kind of uncommon. You're not going to find it in the Midwest. You're only going to find it in major cities, as I like to say, like the whole punk rock shows, nerd conventions, art galleries, vegan restaurants, the classical stuff white people like thing. And so those are itself could be those little communities. But at the same time, from what I'm getting, is that you're also very concerned that if this rhetoric about, imagined communities, something like Benedict Anderson said in his own book, there is this kind of thing you make up this whole reality, and it's not necessarily about our own interest, and rather, from what I'm understanding from your point of view, is that people should really go in their best intentions and create their own individualized communities, right?
I'm saying that people need to do what works for them, and that people are going to find out what works for them based on their own personal observations about the people they interact with, and they have to go by that.
Mm.
And it is also important to go by certain statistics. And it's also important to incorporate those into into your assessment. And but I do think it's what I'm saying though is that people got to work on developing their own local cultures according to the rules that fit for those particular court, like, and develop, certain protocols that are appropriate for those communities. Like, and so when, like, oftentimes problems happen when people try to enforce a standard um, that on a wide geographical area. So what I mean is you had the United States go into Iraq and the Middle East and try to impose democracy on everyone. And what ended up happening is they removed like a dictator like Saddam Hussein, who was sort of keeping the peace. And like, I'm not pro or anti Saddam, but I'm just going to say that when they got rid of the guy, then everything devolved into like tribal warfare. And so what we can deduce from that is that American style democracy may or may not, we don't know, but something that might work in the United States and Western Europe, when you impose it on the Middle East, it might not work, right? And so what I'm saying is that, we're human beings. We are surviving in local territories. This, where we live, that's our territory. So our territory is not the international community. Our territory is not the nation state. Our territory is not even the state. Our territory is our local neighborhood and wherever else we happen to go within our local community. And the things that we encounter in our local environment are the things we have to deal with. The people who are cool to us are the people who are cool to us. The people who if there are any people who aren't cool to us, those are the people who aren't cool to us. So these are the people that we got to deal with. We got to make friends with the people who are friendly, and we got to form the alliances that make sense to us. And we just have to have some common sense about how we do things. And so what happens when people go based on this internet stuff, they go by on the stuff they read on the internet. There can be some useful information from the internet, but a problem can arise if somebody is trying to apply a if somebody is trying to make this national standardization or international standardization of how people are supposed to do things, it just might not fit for an individual person and the environment they happen to live in. You can't try to force a square peg in a round hole. And so if the internet is saying, well, if you're this race or if you're this ethnicity, then you have to fit into this round hole, even though you're a square peg, and it keeps pushing. It's not gonna. If that doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. On the other hand, there are probably some people out there who those particular who where a certain protocol from the internet might actually work for them. You never know. So whatever works for somebody is what works for them. People got to just find out what works for them
Well,
and go with that.
whatchamacallit, we're kind of at the end of the podcast at the moment, but it's a very nice talk to you, Patrick.
Yeah, it's nice talking to you, but I just want to mention one thing before I go. Um, Again, like I think I would just like to revise one thing that I said. I would just
All
like
right.
to say that I do think that a biracial identity between black and white is actually doable. It's just that I think the American culture is such that one would really have to do some heavy thinking in order to resolve any sort of identity issues if one happened to be black and white,
Mm-hmm.
a mixed, biracial mixed person, because the American culture is such that there are lots of identity issues to have to resolve through that. But I do think that somebody could successfully pull that off in an integrated way, but it would just require some thinking in order to defend themselves against the sort of cultural onslaught of just ideas and education that would impact how that identity affected them. So yeah,
That's a very interesting. That's very interesting what you just said. But it's very nice. It's nice. Let's all put a bookmark in that, and hope to talk to you soon. Okay. Thanks for
sure.
thanks for the chat, Patrick.
Yeah, it was nice talking to you.
Bye bye.
Bye.